Welcome to Our College Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. This is the third in our special series of interviews with thought leaders on the community college of the future. I had the privilege of talking with Sandy Shugart, who is the president of Valencia College, at least for a few more days, as Sandy is nearing the end of his career in higher education and at community colleges. It was really interesting to hear from someone who works at an institution that I've admired for a long time, as he nears the end of his career and thinks about running that marathon all the way to the end and doing the very best that he can for students and to serve his community. I hope you enjoy listening to Sandy and you pick up some great ideas for what you think the future of community college should be. Would you introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about your agency or organization and your role?
Well, hello, I'm Sandy Shugart. I'm president of Valencia College, where I've served for almost 22 years and have another 61 days in the saddle before I retire on July 1st. Before that, I was president of North Harris College in the greater Houston area and vice president of the community college system in North Carolina. And then I had various temporary jobs prior to that.
Excellent. Do you have something wonderful planned for retirement?
I'm at the moment I'm completely focused on the finish line. I'm an old marathon guy, and I've had way too many races where I entertain the thought of walking to the finish line. So in this case, I am pressing on trying to get to July 2nd, an empty gas tank and an empty bag of nothing, all spent, and then I'll figure out the next step.
I love that. That's wonderful. So since you are focused on that finish line, what big problems have you been trying to solve in these last couple of years, and are you still trying to solve in those last 61 days?
So Valencia's been very focused for more than 20 years on a core challenge. And the challenge is that community colleges are amazing. They're amazing and almost unique institutions that could solve so many of our community's problems if only we got better results. And the problem we've always had is that our commitments to access and choice and opportunity have always warred with our outcomes. And in particular, overcoming the deep design flaws that were built into community colleges back in the 60s and 70s, most notably the reification of enrollment as the measure of all things. So we've been working for years to shift the core principles of the organization and our decision-making away from enrollment as an outcome, because it's just a business outcome. It's not really a mission outcome, towards the mission outcomes. And those mission outcomes have evolved over time. They mostly have to do with students successfully discerning a pathway, pursuing that pathway, completing that pathway, and then enjoying the fruits of that pathway, whether that's a transfer pathway towards a powerful major or whether that's a career pathway with a shorter finish line. But in every case, we've been focused on how our students can perform at the top of their capacity and believing that there's no reason why students from different neighborhoods and zip codes and ethnicities and races and language groups can't all perform at the very top of the spectrum. And secondly, I think in the middle of that work over the past 20 years, we realized that the outcomes that matter aren't institutional. They're more regional and ecosystem outcomes. So we focused a great deal in recent years on raising the outcomes across the educational ecosystem from pre-K to graduate school in partnership with our natural partners in the region, and getting together to set goals and to share data and to measure our collective impact on the whole arc of a student's experience over time has been really powerful for us, and we think will be powerful for the future.
That's incredible. I love that. I love that vision of the regional outcomes versus only the institutional, because you're right. If we're not focused on making sure that all the boats are lifted, it doesn't do us any good. That's beautiful. So what's an interesting trend that you've discovered with your stakeholders that you think will change the way you work?
So I want to mention three trends that I think are really important among our stakeholders, both those who study with us and those who employ them and engage them in further education. And none of them have to do with technology. I think it's interesting that in the moment of coping with the pandemic and dealing with the rapid advance of using technology to mediate services and instruction and support, that everybody remains focused on that. How much is going to be online post-pandemic and so on. Those are all interesting, but I don't think those are seismic shifts. I think those are changes of degree and not kind. In contrast, I think there are three changes that I would call in-kind contrasts or changes. One is that our students are seeking a different value proposition than we've offered in the past, and thinking in terms of what's our institutional value proposition to our students and our community has helped us. In the past, the answer to that was it's really easy to get in and it's really cheap, and you might be able to figure out a way to turn it into something downstream. That's really been the value proposition. And I don't think that works anymore. I think cost is still important, but I think what students are paying attention to now also is opportunity cost. How long is this going to take? How efficient is the pathway to something I really want to do? Are there ways for me to work and earn while I learn? Can I break out of the category I discovered that I'm in and find a new future for myself and my family that's beyond my category? Is the promise at any level really true for people like me? Those are questions I think they're asking that are pretty powerful. And the answers lie in the pathways that we create and the outcomes that those pathways lead to for all of our students. So one is just this notion of rethinking the value proposition for different kinds of students. That's led us, for example, to grow much more aggressively in areas where the opportunity cost is minimized, even if the direct cost is fairly high. So think of programs that lead to industry certifications of great value in the marketplace in a matter of weeks rather than months or years. We're having enormous success with adults who've been working 60, 70 hours a week in our economy to make their families work, and say, you really can't take 3 or 4 or 5 years to get to your dream. What if we can give you 8 weeks that will lead to a family-sustaining career, and then you can sort out the longer education pathways after your family is taken care of? Things like heavy equipment operation, welding and advanced manufacturing and construction and logistics and transportation, where very short-term training leads to pretty high-value credentials and rapid changes in the economic system of their families. Most importantly, these are things that lead to full-time jobs with benefits. It's not really the rate of pay that's the critical question. It's whether these are jobs that are full-time and with benefits. In the United States, about 30% of hourly workers have their employment involuntarily interrupted every year for at least 3 months. So you can be doing well by patching together a life for your family in hourly wage rates, depending on where you are in the country. But if your employment is interrupted involuntarily, you're at great risk all the time. And full-time jobs with benefits aren't interrupted in that way. You have an expectation of continued employment. You can make plans. You can make investments. You can invest in yourself and your children and so on. So this new value proposition is huge. The second area where I think their expectations are changing, even though they may not be able to give voice to it yet and articulate it clearly, is that all that we have been doing for the last 25 or 30 years has been compounded by the pandemic into a sense of a complete loss of agency. Our students want to have a sense of agency in their lives. They want to know I can make a difference in my own life. And What robs them of agency is depersonalization. For a long time, our organizations, these high access colleges and universities, have been tempted to treat students as objects, as categories, as populations, or worst of all, as enrollments, as FTEs. Do you use that language in Indiana?
Oh, we do. Absolutely.
Yeah. I had this conversation with a friend in Canada and said, as long as we tell people that they're an FTE, they'll behave like an FTE.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it's worse in Canada because we don't say full-time equivalents. We call them funding units.
Oh, my goodness. That is worse.
FUs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Boy, what a terrible thing to think about. So
right.
I think our students, like all human beings, want to be seen as a person, treated as a person, and given a unique response, because the only legitimate definition of human service is to render a unique response to the unique human being in front of you.
Absolutely.
What I'm really claiming there is that we have to adjust our anthropology. These are not equivalent units.
Mm-hmm.
Some a little more talented, some a little less, some a little more privileged, some a little less. They're unique persons, and every person has a story and a destiny and a set of dreams and deep confusions and all the other things that make us human. And the only way to deal with that is to personalize the experience. This is not the same thing as mass customization. So I think we're being challenged to use technology in ways that allow us to personalize what happens rather than to customize or mass customize. A small example here, I have been besieged over the past several years with technology companies who want to automate nudges to students to get them to make better decisions, kind of incrementally through their career. It's a way of focusing institutional response to student behavior by rationing it and automating it. And we have responded very negatively to that. Instead, when we were 2.5 weeks into the conversion of 6,000 courses from face-to-face to online, our team decided to make a personal response. We called on the telephone every student who'd been moved from a face-to-face class to an online class, 34,000 students in about 3.5 weeks. We called them on the phone and talked to them, not to nudge them, not to manipulate them, not to collect revenue, not to tell them they owed us money, but to say, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? Is there anything we can do to help you? This is an institutional behavior that proceeds from a profoundly different anthropology that says these are persons. And I think our students want to be treated as, all human beings want to be treated as persons. And I think we haven't figured that out yet. And our business models, even our curriculum models, tend to depersonalize the very people we were created to serve. So the first area was value proposition. The second, I would say, is focusing on personal. And the third, we may get into with one of your other questions. I'll just say in short, it really has to do with integration of knowledge and skills, therefore curriculum and instruction, that our students want an integrated experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to follow up on one of the things you said. Could you give us some examples of jobs that get interrupted? I think I know, but I want to make sure we are all operating from the same place.
Yeah. It's very different in different parts of the country. We're in the greater Orlando area. Orlando is the most powerful economy in the world for putting unskilled people into low-paying jobs.
Yep.
All the hotels. We have 140,000 hotel rooms. Yep. On any given day, there are 80,000 rental cars on the road. All those rooms have to be cleaned. All those cars have to be parked. So we have perhaps the largest percentage of our workforce in America in hourly labor. Mm-hmm. That is contingent jobs. No benefits, no guaranteed of employment next week, usually very unpredictable work schedules. Mm-hmm. They get used. They really are human resources from that point of view in the service sector economies of a region that depends for a third of its domestic product on tourism and hospitality. Now, we're probably an example in the boldest possible relief of an economy that depends on contingent labor. But America generally has been willing to tolerate very high levels of contingent labor. I do a lot of work in Europe, and a profound difference between the life of particularly of the most prosperous areas in Europe, say Germany and Austria and England and so on, is they don't really tolerate in their economy a lot of contingent labor. Their employers have had to accommodate to an expectation that the value proposition to employees is different there than it is here. And I think it has advantaged not only the workers there, but also small businesses who can compete with big businesses if they don't commoditize labor.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a different place here. I have hopes that our country will find a way to stop commoditizing human beings.
Yeah.
But that's a long road to hoe.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting conversation for higher education as we've seen the move away from full-time faculty to more contingent labor and adjunct faculty as well. So it's a really interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think there are ways of engaging people on flexible schedules and pay systems and so on that don't commoditize them as human beings.
Yeah, agreed. So what do you think? You're the only thought leader interview that we are doing with another community college leader. So what do you think your industry, which is our industry, will look like post-COVID, say a year from now? And then I'll ask you to get as bold as you want if you want to go out on a 5 or a 10 or an even longer horizon.
So that's a great question. How will community colleges be different post-COVID? Well, first, let me say, I'm not sure there is a post-COVID. I believe that what we're into now is a new era where awareness that we're much more vulnerable as a society and as a species than we used to be or used to think we were is going to be with us sort of more permanently. And so I think people are going to assess risk in their operations very differently. And the capacity to pivot depending on external conditions of funding or public health or climate or whatever else might be threatening the status quo are going to be really important to us. And so leadership teams are going to have a much wider capacity to innovate and pivot from one model to another, rather than just perfecting one model of delivery, for example. So I think we'll have many streams of delivery models, and we'll manage those almost like you manage a portfolio of investments. So you balance them. So if one is threatened, another is able to kind of take up the slack. So I think examples of that would be colleges that are equally committed to domestic education and international education, because when domestic student enrollment might be a little soft, then international might shore up the revenue streams, for example, and vice versa. So diversifying your portfolio of business activities makes you a more resilient organization. I think it requires a different set of skills to be able to thrive in multiple business models at the same time. At Valencia, even today, we have a substantial amount of instruction delivered that gets no support from anybody outside the college. It is strictly tuition driven. And we're operating in a tuition model that it gives us lots of flexibility with what we do with that revenue, but driving that revenue is a different set of responsibilities than driving, say, state revenue or federal revenue or grants or all the other streams. So figuring out how to have a blend of business models that are much more resilient over time will be a part of our business. A second is, I think the boundaries are down now. They're still in people's minds a little bit, particularly legislators, which are dominated by old people like me. But the boundaries around who gets to do what in education are quite different. So the fastest growing part of our business right now is dual enrollment. That's high school education. Mm-hmm. And in our college, the second fastest growing area is baccalaureate education. What what ties them together is that these are high opportunity pathways for people who've been neglected by the traditional models.
Yeah.
So instead of thinking of it as mission creep, I think it as mission fulfillment. By far, our fastest growing program is a Bachelor of Applied Science in Business and Organizational Leadership, BASBOL. So we call it baseball. Our baseball degree program's 3.5 years old. It's larger than a third of the colleges in Florida now after 3.5 years.
That's amazing.
It'll be a couple of thousand students by the end of this term. It'll be a couple of thousand FTE in another 2 years. And it's because we know how to craft meaningful engagement for students in learning who want to move through, who want to access opportunities in their current employment that require a bachelor's degree. I think there are going to be many more of those. Bachelor's in nursing, we're already 400 or 500 students there. I think this is all going to continue to grow. There will be noise around it and issues around it. But the notion of an applied bachelor's degree is hard to resist.
Yes.
If you look around the country now, most of the traditional universities are abandoning teacher education. And the private colleges that did a lot of it don't have a value proposition here. Who wants to spend $150,000 in tuition to get a $60,000 a year job? So I see migration there. I think allied health professions where the bachelor's degree is becoming the credential for entry, like dental hygiene, will find their way into our program portfolios as workforce programs, not as right. Nobody's offering bachelor's degrees in creative writing at community colleges, for heaven's sake. It's applied. And I think it's an early signal of a change in work that we might want to talk about too on the interview, that the division between theory and practice in work is being closed. And so institutions that know how to integrate theory and practice are going to be favored as pathways to those leadership roles.
We talk a lot in our leadership meetings that skills pay the bills. And I think that is that integration between theory and practice, that I have to have the skills to match the practice to the theory that I talk about. Let's link right into that future of work question. What do you think the future of work is going to look like 5 to 10 years from now?
So the country has been largely in denial about the big demographic issues for a long time. Every time our employment community sort of wakes up to the fact that demographics are unalterable and that they're facing deep, pervasive skills shortages in key positions in their businesses, we have a little recession or something else that distracts them from the main theme, and they get caught up in these little sub-themes and forget that the big story is the baby boom and the echo baby boom are gone, and there's no getting around it. I think the pandemic is accelerating their recognition that they can't count on abundant supplies of skilled people. And they're in the early stages of anger and denial and blame. Eventually, they'll come around to a stage of dealing with this that says, what are the right solutions? And the solution is that their leadership is going to have to come from within their technical workforce, and that their technical workforce is going to have to come from places where they make sustained partnering strategic investments over time to build that technical workforce. I need to give an example probably of each of those, Kara, to make that real. Two things happened in the past couple of years here that I think were signals for us. One is that the largest single-site private employer in the world, Walt Disney World, came to us and said, we have an enormous number, 50,000 or so, hourly workers. Our challenge is that they'll move from one theme park to another or to another hotel or other service area job for 25 cents an hour. We have a huge turnover issue, and the cost of acquisition and enculturating them into the Disney experience is pretty high. We'd like to deal with that. At the same time, they had received a pretty substantial tax cut windfall from the first year tax cuts in the Trump administration. And they committed $125 million to educating their hourly workforce. And they created a thing called Disney Aspire. It was a breakthrough. I was very much in conversation with them as this was going on. Here's what makes it unique. They will pay for hourly workers only who qualify by having been there a reasonable period of time and so on. They will pay 100% of their tuition fees and books in any major or training program they choose. It doesn't have to be relevant to their job. They're not thinking of this as preparation for their next job at Disney. Their thought is, if you enter into a program at Valencia as a part-time student, you're going to be there for 3 or 4 or 5 years before you graduate. Our average retention time for those jobs now is 11 months. If we can triple or quadruple that, we don't care what you major in. We've saved a ton of money. And as a byproduct, many of you will be better prepared for future jobs at Disney. But even if you go to jobs someplace else, we've had you longer than we would have.
Right.
Brilliant idea.
Mm-hmm.
They coordinated through a third party to create sort of a portal for accessing education, and they selected a handful of institutions to do the work. I don't think they understood their workforce maybe as well as we did. They really thought there were going to be a lot of people doing executive MBAs at UCLA and the University of Florida. The truth is the largest population was taking intensive English classes at Valencia, and the next largest population was doing associate degrees in technical areas at Valencia, as well as industry certifications. So we have a couple thousand students now who are fully paid for. We just third-party bill Walt Disney World. Well, others are noticing this. They set the market in our community. So SeaWorld, Universal Studios, the big hoteliers, even the hospitals. So now Orlando Health, the second largest, actually by market share now, the largest healthcare organization in Florida, has set up a similar program. Their employees can study anything. Doesn't have to be approved by HR as relevant to their job or whatever, but they're increasing their retention rates dramatically and allowing people who are entering jobs that will not sustain a family to get an education that moves them to a job that will.
Right.
So there's community benefit as well. That's what I mean really by a different partnership with industry and a different way of thinking about the engagement of a sort of a three-way partnership, which is employee, employer, and educator. I think that's a wave of the future. It's a disruptive move, and it'll be very difficult for their competitors not to do something similar, or they'll lose their workforce to them.
So what do you think higher education and specifically Ivy Tech should be doing to prepare for the future?
In terms of process to prepare for the future, I think you need to have a different kind of conversation, both with employers and with students. The employer conversation has been a supplier-purchaser conversation for too many years, for 50 years. Employers have thought, we'll place an order, you should fulfill it. If you don't, it's your fault. That's a broken model. That's the vocational education model. We really need to talk in terms of strategic partnerships that create value for both them and for us and for our students. So a sort of three-way strategy that's value creation for all three. Second is, I think we need to be thinking in curriculum about what we want learners to experience that they take with them into work. And I think it's largely about skill integration, about interdisciplinarity, the capacity to think across disciplines. Our fragmentation of the curriculum into the experts who deliver it is a mistake, and we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to team teach and team curriculum and build models where interdisciplinary thinking is the norm for our students and for our faculty, because that's the way they're going to have to think at work. I think there are specific areas of technical knowledge that we're going to have to grow, both among our faculty across disciplines, things like numerical sciences and analytics, just as examples. And the way to grow them in our students, just to grow them in our faculty first, rather than just creating specialty programs. So I know lots of colleges that are rushing to create degree programs in numerical science or analytics or whatever. That's a short-term solution to a short-term challenge. The really big challenge is how do we get our faculty to think that way so it's deeply embedded in the curriculum? And lastly, the integration of what I would call core skills. There people who call them soft skills. There's nothing soft about them. The core skills of communication, empathy, creative problem solving, and so on. The technical skills that have to do with the careers as you progress, and leadership skills. And I think the best way to examine those is to think about the way work's going to be organized. And I think the growing areas of work are in what economists call superstructured organizations. That is, work teams that exist across traditional organizational boundaries, whether that's various companies who bid together on a job or various departments within a company who form work teams that come together to solve a particular problem. And then at the end of the problem solution, they dissolve and they go to others. So the gig economy outside of organizational life is one thing, but the way people will be working inside organizations will feel like multiple gigs or series of gigs over their career. And learning how to flourish in that environment, I think, is going to be important for our students. And because our faculty haven't lived in that world, neither have we, figuring out how to get them to flourish there as well. So I would be investing now in every opportunity I could create for faculty to do internships and externships in the most creative businesses and industries in our communities and bring that work back to the curriculum and to their instruction. And I would try to unsilo every curriculum conversation. So we all know that when curriculum changes are coming forward, the faculty defer to one another by discipline. Well, this is an economics curriculum question. I'm an English teacher, whatever y'all decide's okay with me. That's really not okay anymore. The curriculum ought to be an integrated experience that all of the faculty own. And that's not the way our traditions work really deep in the factory. So figuring out how to unsilo curriculum conversations and make them about what students experience, not what my background is, will be important to that.
I love that idea of bringing the thinking of the gig economy into the organization. That's a really beautiful idea, and one that I'm gonna be reflecting on for a couple of days. Sandy, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and we wish you all the best of luck in your 61 days to the finish line, and then most joy to you as you embark on the next chapter in your life, because I'm sure it will be fun and wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks, Kara.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Our College, Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. You can connect with me on Twitter at KNMTweets. Our producer is Sarah Ferguson. For this special series of episodes, we want to thank our guest producers, Gretchen Keller and Kristen Moreland. You can reach us by email at ourcollegeyourvoices@ivytech.edu. If you're a member of our Ivy Tech faculty and staff, please join our Microsoft Teams listener community. I send out instructions to our entire college community on how to do that every Thursday. Our website is www.ivytech.edu/podcast. You'll find links to show notes and more on that page. Production assistance for this and every episode provided by Becky Campbell and the Ivy Tech Community College Creative Services team. Our podcast concept is by Matthew Pittman. Theme music and post-production services provided by the incredibly talented Jen Yeats at the Brassi Broadcasting Company. We'll talk to you next time on Our College, Your Voices.